Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm a USD alum as well, and I graduated in winter 2010, a long, long time ago. But I feel like a dinosaur whenever I come back to these presentations. But as Kelsey said, I work over at Viasat. I'm no longer doing recruitment, but I do manage a team of recruiters. And in the time that I've been in talent acquisition, I have seen thousands of resumes and hundreds of offers and have extended hundreds of offers. I am impressed with the amount that this generation has started to do in terms of negotiations, because I can tell you that millennials are a lot less likely to negotiate, but this session is actually intended to encourage you to do so. So coming from somebody who's in talent acquisition, it tends to be a recruiter or a hiring manager's worst nightmare when somebody negotiates, because it can be awkward for everybody involved. But I hope in this presentation that you'll walk away with some skills to approach negotiation tactfully and get an offer that both you and the company that you will be employed with will be happy to collaborate on. And I'm going to go through a couple just introductory slides just so that you guys can learn a little bit more about Viasat and what we do. And then we'll go into the negotiation part in a couple of slides. So just a little bit about Viasat. We are a satellite telecommunications company. We focus not on LEO satellites or low Earth orbit solutions. We actually have satellites that go a lot farther and cover more space. I won't go into too much technical stuff in case there's non-technicals here. But basically, we're looking to solve a challenge where we have a highly mobile world and we have a ton of the world's population living on a small percentage of the world's land. And some of the issues that we run into is like rural areas and remote areas, they tend to have less access to connectivity. I mean, if you think of San Diego, just in terms like out in Alpine, you're not going to have the same access to telecommunications networks the way that you would if you're living in the city. Just a lot of service providers don't provide their options out there, or they don't provide high caliber options, and they tend to be really expensive. With
I think you might be on the wrong slide. You're on the example slide.
Just so that's so weird.
Want to make sure they learn about Viasat.
Yeah, let me share again because I am on a different slide. I'm going to just do the share screen because I think that might be the hiccup.
Perfect. Okay, now we're seeing the offer negotiations 101. Do this, not that.
Okay, are you in correct format mode? You can see.
Yes.
Dynamic ability.
Yes.
Okay, now we're on the same page. Thank you. So continuing off where I left off. So Viasat's goal is to bridge the connectivity divide so that if you're working, living, traveling remote, you're able to access internet and connection options. You might know from some of the classes that you've taken, but your ability to have connectivity determines a lot of things like your education level, your ability to attain monetary gains, and even increases countries' GDPs. So we're trying to solve a ton of different problems by bridging that digital divide. And we are doing that by moving away from low Earth orbit satellites, which tend to be fixed. They don't have as much of a lifespan, so they're actually not very sustainable, both in terms of economics and in terms of just global impact. So we go with broadband systems to match high efficiency and demand and provide connectivity to more people at one time. Some of the cool things about Viasat that really attracted me to the company is just the way that the company has positioned itself to be impactful. Coming from USD, I think we're all pretty like mission driven and mission aligned, and we're always looking to find ways to align our values to the companies that we are working for. And coming into the tech company from, or a tech space from nonprofit was really challenging for me to find ones where I genuinely believed in the company's mission and purpose. But Viasat does a lot of awesome things aside from providing like in-flight entertainment and like cruise ship entertainment. They do a lot of really cool things like community Wi-Fi, where they're providing internet hotspots and access in remote communities in Mexico and Brazil. And they're also doing things like disaster relief. So when disasters happen, the first thing to go down is communication. And they provide connectivity to some of the support organizations who are on the ground, like the Red Cross and organizations like that. When I first started Viasat 3.5 years ago, we had just launched Viasat 2. So this is our baby as of right now. And it is a giant satellite that covers, North America, down into Central America and across the Atlantic. And so for the first time ever, you are able to travel across the Atlantic Ocean into parts of Europe and retain your connectivity from the time you take off on the ground until the time you land. And that's never been able to be done before. And as we are moving forward, we're getting ready to launch Viasat 3, which is why we're always looking for talent, because our Viasat 3 is a series of 3 satellites that's actually intended to connect the entire globe. So now, regardless of where you travel or move, you should be able to maintain that connectivity as well. And it's not just maintaining connectivity, it's high speed connectivity. So we are getting ready to launch next year, and then those satellites will be launched in a series, and then we will be on to hopefully Viasat 4. So without further ado, we can go into negotiating. And I'm so excited. This is my favorite presentation to do. Please save your questions. If you have them at the end, I would love to hear them from you. And if you have any questions after this, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. Kelsey, you can provide my email information. So just a couple statistics regarding negotiation. 20% of candidates never negotiate during the interview process. Most of them because it makes them nervous. They feel pretty uncomfortable going forward, and a lot of them because they just don't know how. 46% of men say they always negotiate a job opportunity, but 55% of women are apprehensive at any point. And I think the important part about these 2 bullets is still there's roughly half of candidates on both ends of the spectrum who are not negotiating. That's 50% roughly. And then this next point I love because the older generations, our parents' generations, our grandparents' generations, they were highly likely to negotiate. And then as my generation started moving into the workforce, they became a lot more reluctant. Part of me thinks it's because of the times that we were living in, graduating during a big recession, just being thankful to have any job that wasn't, a serving job after you paid $200,000 to go to school or, something crazy like that. But now we're starting to see that the Gen Z generation is actually more likely to negotiate. So that makes me really excited. And I hope that it is telling of the economy that we're working in and the amount of options that are being given to you. But it's also really important to realize that just because there are a lot of opportunities doesn't mean that you're not a great asset to the company. You have a lot to bring to the company and a lot to offer. And companies and company cultures are shaped by the people that they hire. And so it is really important for you to ensure that you are getting what you are worth, because the average annual raise in America is only 3 to 5%. So that means that the more that you make up front, the bigger your raises are going to be year after year. If you are making $100,000 and you get a 5% raise, you are going to get a $5,000 raise. And if you make $90,000, it is $4,500 raise. And that $500 doesn't seem like a lot, but especially as you get into the later ends of your careers, you're going through an annual raise, that $1,000, $500 difference becomes five and $10,000 difference after 5, 10 years. And so that's how we end up with these big gaps where people doing the same job and working at the same company are making a lot different salaries. So do your negotiating up front. The worst that can happen is that a company could say no and you could still have a job offer in hand. And then the best thing that could happen is that you have an even better offer in hand. And then this is just a fun little one that I like to throw on here. If you drink coffee, you're more likely to stay your ground during a negotiation. So as you are going into that conversation, drink a cup of coffee like 30 minutes in advance. I think it's supposed to, the thought is that it gives you like the energy and the confidence to maintain your own in that conversation and not shy away. So a couple things that determine an offer, and this I think is really important. So equity is going to determine an offer. It should, at least. If you're working for a great company, they're going to be looking at internal equity across the board to make sure that you're not coming in with a huge gap between your peers. If you're working on the same task at hand and you have similar experience that you're bringing to the table, you should be making a fair salary. Location can impact a salary, but it does not always. And one of the resources that Kelsey will be sending out after this is a really interesting blog article that talks about the cost of labor versus the cost of living. And every company is going to do it differently. But when a company is looking at the cost of living, they're going to take into consideration everything that you think of when it comes to living. So like how much your rent is, like how much it costs to commute, what the taxes are in that location. And then the cost of labor is going to actually take a look at labor trends. So how scarce that skill set is, how many employers are in that area, and what the average cost is to sustain that labor in a company and profitability. So whereas I don't know that it's necessarily something that is necessary to know for negotiating, I think that it's good to know about the company when you're going into it, because that can help you to understand what type of offer you might be made. Your education definitely can come into play, but again, it does not always. You'll see big companies that hire engineers, software engineers out of boot camps who don't have college degrees. And then you'll see some where they require a college degree. And so again, if you're doing the same job, you might still be making the same amount of money as somebody who is coming in with a different or lesser degree than you. It's not always the case, but it could be. And it could influence you also getting a higher salary if you have gone to like an advanced school or a program. Your experience definitely comes into play. I think this is probably one of the biggest ones that I have seen to be useful when it comes to coming up with a higher salary. The more experience that you have, work experience, they assume that you're going to be able to contribute and learn a lot faster. And so that tends to place you higher in that job range, in that job bracket. The company is also going to take a look at the responsibilities. So I've referenced this a lot already. This is the task at hand that you will be performing. So this kind of goes hand in hand with equity, in my opinion. If they're saying running internal equity and saying, okay, this person is going to most likely be doing the same task as person A, person B, and person C, they're going to want to make sure that your compensation is aligned with those three people if your responsibilities are aligned with those three people. And then performance really comes in hand when you are coming from like a returning internship or you're promoting within the same company. If you have demonstrated performance, this is a lot easier to prove rather than, speaking to your own performance without them actually having evidence of it. And then again, demand, skill, and impact. I think these kind of go based off of that cost of labor or just the labor market. Right now in engineering, I can tell you like cybersecurity and DevOps engineers are in really high demand, and we have seen a lot less like embedded demand in our industry. And a lot of that is just the way that the market has shifted due to COVID and us all being remote, right? And having to work within a lot of new platforms. And so the demand has changed, which is changing the demand for the skills that we are looking for with people and their ability to make a big impact at that company. You can be hired and be determined to have a high impact just based on the team that you're placed on or based on the role that you're applying to. But I like to show this slide because I think a lot of students come into offer negotiating assuming that location, education, and experience are the only things that are shaping the offer that they're being made. And I have been asked so many times, was my master's degree factored into my job offer? And the answer is yes, but there are a ton of other things that also went into play when determining your offer. And again, education, location are definitely not a guarantee that you're going to have a really high or a really low offer. When you're negotiating, I think it's really important to understand the different components of the offer and what you can negotiate. All too often, we get focused on the direct compensation. The direct compensation includes things like your salary, your bonus, if you have any relocation or stock options. And I would definitely say the majority of what people focus on is that salary, which is understandable. Because like I said, the higher your salary, the more likely your raises are to be in the long run. But it doesn't mean that if the salary that you want gets shot down, that you should stop there. There are a lot of other things that you can take into consideration. And then there are the benefits aspect of things. These tend to be things that are more fixed, less companies are willing to be flexible with these. They include things like your health benefits, your health benefit contributions, a 401k plan, your PTO, including like sick time and vacation time and holidays. But I do know that there are some companies out there that do negotiate things like your paid time off. So it is worth asking if it's important to you. And then again, things you can't negotiate, but I still think are important to take into consideration when it comes to applying and interviewing and evaluating a job offer are things just like the company culture, career growth, location, and your opportunity. They're things that you should ask about. They're really important. Sometimes location actually can be negotiated. I have had folks who have applied to one and they've ended up getting like a hybrid, like yes, you can report into the Boston office 1 or 2 days a week, and the remaining 3 weeks you can be remote. And that was years ago. So always worth asking if it is important to you. So when you approach a negotiation, it's really important to kick it off with questions instead of just coming, I think, with a demand. Some of the best questions I think that you can ask is if the offer is negotiable. They'll tell you up front whether it's negotiable. It might even spark a conversation with them asking you what aspects you're hoping to negotiate. Or they might tell you what things you can negotiate. And that is great to ask. If they don't tell you what parts of your offer are negotiable, I would ask. So aside from the base pay, are X, Y, and Z negotiable? Can I negotiate where I'm working? Can I negotiate how often I'm going into the office? Can I negotiate for a relocation bonus? Can I negotiate for a sign-on bonus? And then it's important, I think, to still ask how the salary was calculated and what factors were taken into consideration. We are people and people are not automated. And so you might have a master's degree that was taken into consideration, and you might have a master's degree that was overlooked, or you might have taken something off of your resume or something that was incomplete on your resume. Maybe a year's worth of work experience that just showed as present, or maybe wasn't added on there that you want to make sure was factored in. So be mindful of what you're bringing to the table and be prepared to ask if it was taken into consideration. I think this fourth one is really important to ask more towards the end as you get closer to the end of a negotiation. So what opportunities for salary increases or promotions will be available? This is also good to ask if the negotiation is non-negotiable. So the answers that you might get to this are that, There's performance bonuses that are provided quarterly or annually, or they do cost of living increases. They evaluate those every year, and they do a merit increase every year. I think it's okay to also ask, like, if certain things are contingent. So some companies, like their 401k match is contingent on board approval. And if it is, you might want to ask, like, what years or what recent years where was that match not made? And so that can help you to evaluate whether this is going to be a good match or investment, or how often has the company had to move or shift. We call them focal increases, annual increases. Some companies, my husband worked for a company for 4 years. They did a focal increase for the entire company his first year, and then the 3 years that he was there after that, nobody received an increase. And in fact, everybody received furloughs for an entire month out of the year. So they were making less of their salary. So these are just good things to keep in mind, like if the health of the company, because the health of the company is going to impact the monetary compensation that you're provided over the long term of being there. And then always ask if you're going to be receiving things in writing. You should always get an offer letter, but if the recruiter discussed things with you that are not included in that offer letter, you should get that in writing. It is always good to reference back to and have that support, because sometimes it's also easy when you're in an offer negotiation and it's kind of uncomfortable for things to be misunderstood. So get everything that you can in writing. As you start asking some questions, though, be prepared for some tough questions to answer. Recruiters are trying to close their jobs, and they're trying to do what's best for their company. And hopefully you are what's best for their company, but the priority for them is making sure that the jobs are filled, because all of the jobs that they have open are scoped to perform certain projects and certain tasks that most likely come with deadlines. So they might ask you if you have any offers on the table. And if you do, they might ask you if they are your top choice, or what factors you're taking into consideration when evaluating your offers. So you might go in and say, I received this engineering opportunity and the offer was $88,000, and I would like to negotiate it up to 95. And then the recruiter might say, great, talk to me a little bit more about where you got those numbers. Do you have any other offers on hand? And if you say, yes, I do have a couple other offers, they might ask, can you tell me a little bit more about those offers? What job title are they? What company? What location? How much are they paying you? And this isn't intended to be an interrogation. Oftentimes it's intended to see how far off we're missing it. And I asked these questions yesterday, actually, during an offer negotiation, because I'm covering Iraq. And for me specifically, it's a new position that we have not recruited for on my team. And so me asking these questions is intended to help me give feedback to my hiring team on if they're missing the mark compared to the market that's out there. Always be honest, don't inflate. If you tell me that VMware is hiring a DSP engineer for like $200,000, I can do some pretty easy research on that. And we have an entire compensation team that runs analysis on thousands of jobs over thousands of participating companies. So the advice that I give on this third bullet is don't lie. Just be really honest about what you have on hand. It can come back to negatively impact you either in the immediate or the long-term future. But the important thing about going forward in this conversation is you want to have an honest conversation, because you want the recruiter to be honest with you too, right? Is this offer that I'm being made fair? Because here are the other offers that I have. And also, if you're saying that the top priority for you is to be in a location where that's close to home, and you're from Wisconsin and this offer is in Arizona, they might not even negotiate, because they might not be able to, they might just say, like, this person's most likely going to get an offer, in Minnesota or Wisconsin. We're just going to be negotiating for the sake of negotiating. We're going to let them go. Or they could say, hey, we actually have an office in this other location. Let's see if we can, try and find something for you in that location. So again, it's a dance. There are a lot of things that come up, and the best thing that you can do is answer the tough questions honestly, keep your ethics at the forefront, but don't be too eager to please. This is the other part of negotiating. If a company is not your top choice, don't tell them that they are your top choice. If you're like, I'm ready to sign, I want to negotiate, here's what I'm thinking. I'm going to think, you just said you're ready to sign. So I'm going to say no. Like, so don't come in over to please, come in with a case, come in with some research, come in with some homework. And again, you want to be selling yourself as much as you are showing interest. The research is really, really important when it comes to offer negotiations. You should always go into an offer negotiation knowing your worth. I would even say you should go into a phone screen or a job interview knowing your worth. I prefer that people ask me the salary range during a phone screen rather than wait the negotiation process. Because if the salary gap is like 20,000 less than you're expecting, we're most likely not going to be able to close that gap for you. And it might not be worth your time to go forward with the interview if it is that important to you. And it's not a really good use of the company's time. So they might be a little bit disgruntled in the end if that communication wasn't made around the expectation. It's not surprising, so you won't burn a bridge if you wait. But it's just always helpful to know in advance what you're walking into. Something to know in the state of California, I don't know about all the other states, but in the state of California, if an employer has an office there and they're offering jobs there, you can legally ask the range of the position that you are applying to, and they are required by law to tell you what that salary range is if you are an applicant. So when you get to that phone screen, ask the range, and that is a good time to start that conversation. My favorite tools are the ones that are listed at the top, and this slide deck will be sent out via PDF. So you'll have a list of these resources, but Indeed has a really cool tool called Find Salaries, where you can actually find the specific salaries for the job at the company in the location that you're applying to. I would say that if the company doesn't actively hire on Indeed a lot, you might not see a ton of information on there. It's fairly new. And so if that's the case, then I would recommend using salary and pay scale concurrently. So salary.com is going to give you an estimate of what your salary should be. And you'll see it in this like top right slide that I have. So it'll give you like an estimate, like your total compensation pay should be roughly around this much, which is in this percentile of that job market. And it takes into consideration your work experience, the location, the number of employees at the company, your job title, if you have direct reports, your education, all of that. It's highly customizable to you. And that gives you your estimated worth either for a job at a company or for just a job in general. And then payscale.com is another one. And Payscale just takes a look at how competitive certain jobs are in the market and what those jobs can actually be expected to make in a specific location at a specific size company. So if you combine the two, you should be able to get a good range or pretty similar numbers so that you have a good starting point. One of the things that I discourage is just using Glassdoor and looking at Glassdoor's salaries section, like on a company. If you were to search like Viasat, like salaries, you'll type in like software engineer. Those are self-reported, and they're also modified to provide anonymity to employees. So they're not always 100% accurate. They're sometimes really outdated because they don't update year over year. It's like all of the data that's been collected at a point in time. And so the range could look very big. You might see that a software engineer range is from like 70,000 to like 160,000. And that's all people, all time, all education levels, all experience levels. And it's just really hard to figure out where you are in that. But Glassdoor has recently come out with a salary calculator, and that seems to be more on par with like salary.com and PayScale. I personally preference using salary and PayScale separately than the Glassdoor salary calculator, still because it's a newer tool. And I just think that salary.com and payscale.com have a little bit more data that they're working with that is more up to date. So that's a personal preference, but it never hurts to use as much as possible. And then LinkedIn salary is similar to Indeed salaries in the sense that you're going to be able to see salaries for companies that are posting using LinkedIn. All right, so a couple things just do and then don't do. I've covered a lot of these, but I think it's important to cover them again. Always do your research. Again, you want to know what you can expect to make in a job market, but you also want to know what that company is paying. Just because a job market is highly competitive doesn't mean that all companies are going to offer that. So doing some research on the market and some research on the company are important. Some companies are small, they have to pay less. Ask about the salary range up front. Don't wait until the end to ask it. And then paint a picture. So as you're going through that negotiation process, I think that it's really important to visit back to that wheel that talks about all of the different things that are taken into consideration. If you are asking for a negotiation, you want to paint a picture of your performance that has been demonstrated, the years of experience, the education that you have, any certifications that you might be enrolled in, completed, or will be enrolled in. If you are working in a really niche skill set that might be hard to find, I think that it's worth putting that out there. Like, hey, cybersecurity engineers are in demand right now, and I have these security certifications that I'm planning to work on. I think that I could be a huge asset to your company in the next 6 months. I did some market research and this is what I found, and this is the number that I'm trying to get for. Sticking with an exact number is also really important. And the reason I say that is because if you give a range, the company is going to target the lower end of that range. If you say, I'm hoping to make between 90 and 95,000, I'm going to go with 90 because that is the healthiest option for the business. But if you say, I'd like to be making $90,000, I might try and get as close to that $95,000 as I can. I might hit like 92, 93. If we're lucky, both of us, 95. But giving a firm dollar amount is always your best option rather than giving a range. And then being open to stock and bonus options. If the company is just not hitting the target, then it's okay to say like, hey, we weren't really able to close in on that 95,000 that I'm making. I'm really appreciative of the 92,000, but do you think that there's an opportunity to get the additional $3,000 via a sign-on bonus? And then you're closing that $5,000 gap a little bit differently, but you're still closing the gap, hopefully. Counter the offer. So if they come back to you with an offer, don't be afraid to counter their offer. They make you an offer, you negotiate, they come back to the wheel with a new offer, you can still negotiate. But again, it goes back to revisiting those questions, because what you don't want to do is push them a little too far where it just starts getting to be tactless. And then use positive language. You always want to show your appreciation for the company, your excitement about the company. The offer negotiation that I was a part of yesterday, the gentleman that I spoke with was like, I'm so excited about Viasat. It's my top choice. I really feel like I fit in with the culture and I feel like I hit it off with the company. I would be really eager to sign, but there is this gap in my salary that I'm really, eager to close. And if we could close that, I would be ready to sign the offer right now. And in my opinion, that was perfect. I got so excited that he negotiated. I'm like immediately emailing the engineering director, like, what can we do? This candidate's so great. If we can do this, he's going to sign right now. And that gets the team excited. Keep in mind that your recruiter is your liaison into the compensation. And so the more that you can win them over, the more they're going to go to bat for you. And so keep that relationship open, positive, starting with the phone screen. Be engaged, spark up a great conversation. You can always like pull in those nuggets during your offer negotiation and just thank them for the help. Like, I always feel so good when somebody is like, you've been so great through this process. It has been seamless. I feel like I haven't had any hiccups. I'm like, let me keep it that way. So build that relationship and use that positive body language. If you are doing it virtually, I don't know a lot of companies that are, but just be aware of the tone and the body language that you're putting off. You could be using really positive body language and be like stiff as a board and stoic and come off as like very nervous or intimidating. And
Ashley,
then,
just be aware of time. It is 1:10. So I just
perfect.
wanted to let you know.
I only have, I think, one slide after this.
Okay, perfect.
So a couple things on this don't settle for the first offer. I already talked about that. Don't negotiate just for the sake of it. If you're happy with the offer and you think that it is fair and competitive and is in alignment with what you were expecting, it's okay to accept. You don't have to negotiate just for the sake of negotiating. Don't give an ultimatum because you do risk the company walking away from the offer. And also, if they really think that it is combative, they could actually rescind that offer. Um, don't be boastful. You want to come in confident, but not egotistical. Don't go too high in that counter that goes in with doing your research, and don't disclose your current salary if you have a job. Your current salary should have zero impact on the salary that you're making in your next job. And so if they ask you that, you can direct it back at them like, hey, I'd actually like to know more about what the range is for this job, and then we can talk about a number that I'm interested in. And don't apologize for negotiating. It can be fun, and don't use your acquaintances as leverage. It's really awkward when a parent starts to step in for negotiating. I already went over a couple of these examples. So again, if they ask how much you want to make, I'd love to give you a figure, but I was wondering if you could share your budget for the role. I don't want to go in too high, and I'd love to figure out what would work for both of us. If you're doing a negotiation pitch and you know that they're in like a budgetary constraint, you can say, I want to be flexible. I'm really excited about your group. I want to explore if this salary number is possible given my experience and skill set. And then when they say no, just stay calm and say like, hey, thanks. I appreciate your help. I can get back to you on this date. Don't ever feel like you need to give it a response right now. Always take your time to evaluate your options. And then when the negotiating is done, again, positive, do some research, take a couple days, follow up with a thank you. You can also utilize these 3 resources at the bottom just to see if you are being given a competitive or a fair offer. So She Negotiates is great. It's an organization where people review offers for you to tell you if it's a good offer. And then 81 cents is a similar one. Questions?
Thank you, Ashley. That was such great information, and I hope the students learned a lot. We do want to open it up for questions, so make sure you can either unmute if you'd like to ask Ashley directly, or you can send it in the chat and I can voice it for you.
Thank you, Ashley, for that. One question I have, I'm looking at probably doing something in sales. Do you find that commission rates are typically negotiable?
Not usually. So I don't, but I would I worked at Yelp for a while, and I wasn't on the sales team, but I was pretty familiar with the sales comp structure. And I would ask them what it entails, because usually once you've hit like a certain number of sales, you go to a different tier and then your commission starts to get higher. Or if you're in like a different department. So like local accounts versus mid-market versus national, the commission is going to be a lot different. So commission not always negotiable. You can ask if they do performance bonuses though, on top of commission, and then what the promotion structure looks like for sales. I think it would also be worth asking, like on average, what the commission check looks like for people starting out.
Okay, thank you.
actually, this is Rhonda Harley. I have a ton of questions. Rhonda Harley in career development in the School of Engineering, who works with a whole lot of students who are interested in Viasat all the time, okay? But I did have a question just as regarding the application process and that question around, and maybe you mentioned it, so I apologize if I missed this, but the question around what your salary expectations are in the application. Students never say, and they always think, if I shoot too high, will that close the door on me even getting an interview? So what is your tip on that question in the application?
So if you can get around not answering it, I always like that. And if you can't get around not answering it, that research is going to be really important. That one I think would entail a lot more research because again, you don't want to shoot too high, but you don't want to come in too low. And I think that it's important to revisit that during a phone screen as well. So even if you have to put it in, still make sure you're asking the range during the phone screen. I know my team specifically for university grads, I think it is in the application, but we don't tend to look at it. But some companies might. And if you do go too high, it could be a disqualifier. So I think that is one where I would do a lot of homework on before I go ahead and answer it.
Right. Okay. Can I ask one more question? And then this is about the students, not about me, I understand. But I do have one more question. Can you just tell us the process of the negotiation when the negotiation comes back to you? So if I negotiate back and have another number, do you then go to HR? Do you talk to the hiring manager I might have interviewed with? Do they know I asked for more money? Like, I just know a lot of students are like, oh God, I don't want the person who's gonna be my manager. No, there's a lot of unknowns. So what's the kind of circle of life?
Yeah, the circle of life includes all of those people.
Yeah,
so compensation has to be approved. And sometimes it goes up really high. So sometimes the VPs even have to approve for that segment. Usually what will happen is the recruiter will, gather all the information. The recruiter is a big determinant in salary. So they're the ones who are pulling that internal equity, sometimes in tandem with a business partner. So they'll pull like internal equity and see like, if I give this person this salary, am I going to throw off that internal equity balance? And the business partner and then the recruiter will generally try and come up with like a better number. And then the recruiter will reach out with the usually director or hiring manager, depending on who the compensation partner is for that, and say like, hey, what are your ideas on these two options? That's at least what I do. And I'll usually give one that's like a salary only, and then I'll give one that's like a salary and a bonus if I think that the salary might tip the equity scale. Internal equity is huge at companies, especially right now. So we're really cognizant of that. And then afterwards, if we get approval, we have to reroute the offer for approval to get approval from the business partner, the engineering director or the director, the hiring manager, the VP, whoever was included in that offer process, finance, they all need to be included on those changes because they impact headcount and financials.
That's great.
So it could be like an entire week or two before you.
I was gonna say, that sounds like a situation or a lot of conversations.
A lot of time.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you for that.
No problem.
A student question came into the chat. When do you ask the salary range? If HR is looking for you for a specific position and wants to know what my salary expectations are?
If they ask what your salary expectations are, turn it around on them and ask them what the pay range is for that job during your phone screen. So usually they're going to ask you what your salary expectation is in that initial phone screen, and that'll be on the slide deck that I send out. But that's where I think it's really important to say, I'd love to talk to you about my expectation for the salary, but I'm really interested in understanding the range that you're planning to offer for this position. And then my recommendation is always to shoot for that like middle, like high middle. You don't want to go to the highest end unless you really believe you're actually like hitting that highest qualifier. But I think that staying in that top half is really important.
Sorry, to continue, that was my question. Thank you, Ashley. This is Magali. And I had this issue last week because they were looking for me for a specific position, and I answered a specific salary, and they didn't reply back. But they wanted to talk to me because someone else referred me, and I don't know what to do regarding that situation. If I should follow up and make sure that I can have that call, even though I just mentioned salary and that was not the best answer. Now that I wish I had this conversation or this talk with you before, but I made a mistake. So what would you suggest?
I would suggest just reaching out and saying like, hi, I wanted to follow up on my last email. I know I sent this over. I'd be open to a conversation, regarding my qualifications. And if I'm missing the mark on salary, I'd be happy to discuss that on a call as well. And just see if they're open to taking the call.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I want to be mindful of time, so it is 1:19. If students need to leave for class or another meeting, please feel free. Ashley, I don't know your availability if you could stay for a few more minutes for questions, but thank you everyone who did come. We had a quick slide deck from CDEV of just some upcoming events. The Trek deadline is November 15th, so make sure that you apply if you're interested in attending Treks in December and January, and then everyone go out and vote today. It's election day. So thank you all for coming, and we can stay a few minutes for more questions, but I'll be sending out follow-up information as well.